Private First Class Douglas Jacobson crouched behind volcanic rock on the western slope of Hill 382 at 9 o'clock on the morning of February 26, 1945, watching a two-man bazooka team ahead of him get cut down by a Japanese 20mm gun before either man could fire a single rocket. 19 years old, 3 island campaigns already behind him, 0 decorations. In the next 90 minutes, he was going to do something no Marine training manual had ever contemplated: operate a weapon built for 2 men, entirely alone, against 16 fortified positions in a row. Hill 382 anchored the whole Japanese defensive system on Iwo Jima's northern half, 125 feet of volcanic rock the Japanese had spent 8 months turning into overlapping fields of fire, concrete pillboxes, buried light tanks, anti-tank guns commanding every approach, all connected by tunnels the pre-invasion bombardment had barely scratched. Marines called this stretch the meat grinder without a hint of exaggeration. Company I had already lost 17 men killed and 26 wounded in the first 30 minutes of this single assault, and the 20mm gun still chewing up the slope meant the whole attack was about to stall completely. The bazooka lying in the open ash was designed strictly for 2 men. A gunner to aim and fire, a loader to insert the rocket and wire it live, and both men who'd carried it were now dead. Jacobson looked at the weapon, looked at the gun crew still killing Marines 70 yards away, and made a decision nobody would have faulted him for not making. If you want to see one Marine take on 16 fortified positions completely alone, hit that like button. It helps us bring you more stories like this one. Subscribe if you haven't already. Back to Jacobson. A sniper had already dropped the last man who'd tried to reach the bazooka within 5 yards of trying. Jacobson ran anyway, grabbed the launcher tube and the loader's canvas bag with 4 remaining rockets, and dove behind a rock cluster 30 yards out, with the anti-aircraft gun's rounds cracking past his head the entire way. 67 pounds of steel and explosive, and he'd never fired the weapon alone in his life. Training called for 2 men working in careful sequence. Insert, wire, tap the helmet, confirm the backblast was clear, fire. Jacobson skipped straight to doing all of it himself, hands moving as fast as they could, while a 4-man gun crew adjusted their aim toward the rocks he was hiding behind. He rose, sighted on a gun 80 yards out, and fired. The rocket crossed the distance in a single second, and detonated the shield dead center, and the entire crew disintegrated in the blast. Company I started moving again immediately. Jacobson reloaded alone in 40 seconds, a job built for 12, and had barely caught his breath before 2 more machine guns opened up from higher on the slope, cutting down 3 more Marines in their first burst. These positions were dug into earth cover, invisible except when firing, and Jacobson worked them one at a time, rather than rushing, flanking the first at 40 yards, watching the barrel traverse, timing his shot to when it swung away from him, putting a rocket straight through the earthen roof. The second gun immediately swung to hunt him specifically, forcing him to crawl 20 yards under fire before he found a gap in their reload cycle and fired his last rocket from that magazine. 3 positions gone. Ahead sat something the first 2 rockets hadn't prepared him for at all: a reinforced blockhouse 3 feet of concrete thick that battleship gunfire itself had failed to crack. A frontal shot would waste his last rocket against solid concrete for nothing. Jacobson crawled 40 yards around to the blind side instead, where the Japanese had built no firing slit at all, assuming correctly that no attacker would ever approach from inside their own defensive perimeter. He found a low rear entrance covered by a wooden frame, put his last rocket through it to blow the door open, then pulled a grenade off his belt and threw it through the smoking gap, rather than risk the backblast of another rocket in that confined space. Screams, then total silence. 4 positions down, and Jacobson was now completely out of ammunition, with 12 fortified positions still standing between Company 1 and the summit. The supply point sat 200 yards back, across Ground 3. Marines had already died, trying to cross that same morning, mortar rounds falling on it intermittently, the entire time. Jacobson went anyway, weaving between depressions while snipers tracked him, grabbed 4 fresh rockets from a crate, and ran back uphill as a mortar round landed 30 yards behind him, close enough to feel the shrapnel hum overhead. A 5-man pillbox crew 90 yards up the slope had already seen the blockhouse die and opened fire on him early, nervous, wasting ammunition in short bursts that gave Jacobson 3 clean seconds of movement between each one. Their firing slit, built narrow for protection, meant their machine gun could only traverse so far before hitting the concrete edge of its own opening, and Jacobson forced the gun to its limit, waited for the pause, and put a rocket directly through the slit, 5 positions down. Then a simple earthen log rifle pit fell to a rocket fired from above, angled down through the overhead cover the Japanese had built specifically to survive artillery coming in flat and low. 6 down, 10 to go, and ahead, arranged in a semicircle around the final approach to the summit, sat the position the entire 23rd Marines had already failed twice to break. 6 interlocking positions spanning 60 yards, built to support each other so completely that attacking any single one exposed you to all the rest. Rifle pits, a machine gun nest, 2 mortar positions, and a reinforced observation post with a clear view of the whole western slope. Jacobson had 4 rockets left for 6 targets, arithmetic that didn't close no matter how he did the math, and he made the only decision that gave Company I a chance. Take the observation post first, because without spotters, the rest of the cluster would be fighting blind. He circled wide around the perimeter's flank, reached 70 yards from the post, and put 2 rockets into its reinforced wall until it collapsed entirely. A rifle pit spotted him during the smoke and nearly caught him with aimed fire. Jacobson answered with a grenade rather than burn a rocket on 2 riflemen, dropping it directly into the pit. 6 rockets and grenades expended across 8 destroyed positions now, with mortar crews inside the cluster already adjusting fire onto his exact position and giving him roughly 10 seconds before the rounds landed. He moved constantly, never staying anywhere long enough for the mortars to find him twice, catching a disciplined machine gunner's reload pause to put his second-to-last rocket into that position and silence it for good. 2 rockets left, 3 positions remaining, 2 mortar pits, and a rifle pit standing directly between him and them. He chose the mortars first, since they were the ones actively killing Marines below, and burned his last 2 rockets on both mortar pits in succession, watching one tube launch end over end through the air from the force of the blast. 12 positions destroyed. 1 rifle pit left in the cluster, 3 Japanese riflemen who'd already spotted him and opened fire with everything they had. Jacobson dropped the now useless launcher tube, unslung his M1 Garand, and finished the job the old-fashioned way. 3 shots, 3 men down, the 6-position killing ground that had stopped 2 previous assaults finally silent. Company I began advancing past him toward the summit, and across a shallow ravine to his left, an entirely separate Marine company from the 24th Marines was pinned down by a pillbox Jacobson could see but they couldn't, its firing slit sweeping the only approach into a killing field. He resupplied again under sniper fire, crossed to help a company he'd never fought alongside, and used dead ground the pillbox gun couldn't depress low enough to reach, working close enough to put 1 rocket through its narrow slit and end that threat entirely. 14 positions down, and then he heard something new grinding up the eastern slope toward the advancing Marines below him. A Japanese light tank, turret already traversing to target men who had no idea it was there. Its thin armor was vulnerable to a shaped charge from almost any angle, but a light tank crew trained under fire was still a dangerous target to face with a single rocket. Jacobson hit the turret first, jamming its traverse mechanism and forcing the crew to try reversing blind, then flanked to the rear and put a second rocket through the engine deck, igniting the fuel and finishing the kill as 2 crewmen bailed out burning. 15 positions destroyed. 1 final blockhouse remained at the summit itself, the largest structure yet, 4 feet of reinforced concrete and volcanic rock that a 16-inch battleship shell had already failed to crack outright. Jacobson had exactly one rocket left. A frontal shot risked wasting it against solid concrete for nothing. He circled to the rear instead, and found a reinforced door facing away from the main American advance. Put his last rocket through the steel frame to blow it open, then dropped the empty tube, drew his rifle, and went in with 2 grenades and whatever ammunition remained in his pistol. What followed was close, brutal, room-to-room fighting inside a structure filled with smoke and wounded defenders. Finished within 2 minutes, the last of 16 Japanese positions destroyed, 75 enemy dead in total across 90 minutes of continuous, mostly solo combat. Company I poured through the gap Jacobson had cut open. By noon, the 23rd Marines held the high ground that had anchored the entire Japanese defensive line on Iwo Jima's north end, at a cost, across the whole regiment, that would eventually reach 50% casualties before the island was declared secure 3 weeks later. 27 Marines and sailors earned the Medal of Honor across the entire Iwo Jima campaign, more than any single battle in American history. Jacobson received his from President Truman at the White House that October, promoted afterward, stayed in the Marine Corps for 24 years, took his GED as a serving major because he'd left high school early to become a draftsman before the war, and retired quietly to Florida, rarely discussing what had happened on that slope unless someone asked him directly. Asked once how he'd managed it, Jacobson said simply that he didn't fully know, that in the moment, he'd had exactly one thing in mind, which was getting off that hill. 16 positions, 75 men, 90 minutes, 1 Marine, and a weapon built for 2. If this story moved you the way it moved us, hit that like button. Everyone tells YouTube to put this story in front of more people. Subscribe and turn on notifications. We're rescuing stories like this one out of the archive every single week. Drop a comment and tell us where you're watching from. And if anyone in your family served, we want to hear it. Thanks for watching, and thanks for making sure Douglas Jacobson doesn't disappear into silence.